Welcome to Feature Fridays. My name is Guy Bartram, Director of Product Marketing at our cloud provider business unit in VMware. And today, delighted to be joined again by Gerrit, Stefan, and Jorg. And for those who haven't seen the previous episodes of the Tanzu series, let's just do a quick introduction again. So Gerrit, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, Guy. Gerrit Lehr, Cloud Solution Strategist with the multi-cloud strategy and architecture team here at VMware.
Thank you. And Stefan?
Yes. Hi, Guy. Thanks a lot. My name is Stefan Berner, Lead Solution Architect, focusing on modern applications in the VCPP program.
Thanks, Stefan. And Jorg?
Yeah, Jorg, I'm a Technical Product Manager in the Cloud Director business unit.
Excellent. Well, thanks, guys, for coming on to the the third, I think, episode of this Tanzu series. And in the first episode, we covered the basics about the packaging and the nomenclature and what Tanzu was all about. In the last episode, we covered TKGs. And in this episode, we're going to dive into TKGm and what TKGm is all about. So does anyone want to kick off for, what is TKGm in a nutshell?
Yeah, I can start with that one. Okay. So in the last episode, we kind of touched on, TKGs, which is one flavor of TKG that is, tightly integrated into vSphere 7 with Tanzu. And it only runs on vSphere 7 with Tanzu. TKGm, on the other side, is our approach to bring the same Kubernetes layer to any cloud, whether it's vSphere in, version 6.7 or 7, or even native hyperscale cloud. So it's more multi-cloud capable and has, slightly different architecture, which I believe, are going to cover today in more depth.
Thanks, Gerrit. And yeah, so the M is for multi-cloud. And this is, particularly useful when you're looking at shared environments like VMware Cloud Director, or you're looking at using hyperscaler clouds as well, or other, bare metal endpoints, whatever it might be. TKGm makes a really good control plane and single solution for that. So Stefan, do you want to just step us through some of the kind of high-level views on TKGm, and we'll ask questions and comments as we go?
Sure. So last time we noticed that TKGs is not the ideal solution in a multi-tenant environment. And today I want to explain you why TKGm is more suitable for a multi-tenant solution. And the main difference between TKGm and TKGs is the network architecture. So let us start from a logical Cloud Director view. So within Cloud Director, we have a tenant, we have some external connectivity, and I would like to start to explain how you connect your workloads to the external world. So within vCloud Director, you have an external network. External network means the T0 connectivity to the internet, and everything that is living within the tenant uses an external network, be it a routed network, as I show there, or be it a direct connected network to the internet. And on the other hand, in a Cloud Director tenant, you have an org network, and typically your legacy workloads live within an org network. And if we now add a TKGm cluster, a Kubernetes cluster, you can notice that the TKGm cluster, from a network perspective, lives in the org network as well. So this means that your Kubernetes workloads and your legacy workloads are existing side by side on the same layer 2 network, on the same org network in the same context. So it could be the same org network, but it could be a dedicated, but the routing is done within the customer context. So the tenant has a routing instance as well, a tier 1 router, and everything from a network perspective is defined in a tenant.
Yes. Sorry, Stefan, just to interrupt. So just the difference between TKGs and TKGm in this scenario was TKGm was looking at using or used SNAT, DNAT policies to control access to other networks, and had a shared layer 2 infrastructure, so it wasn't on a kind of per tenant environment. And VCD was taking care of all those NAT rules automatically with NSX.
Yes.
So not ideal, but a solution.
Yes. So as you mentioned, in TKGs, all the networking is defined out of the control of Cloud Director, and we are bringing micro-segmentation in place from vCloud Director to separate the tenants. Within TKGm, all the network architecture, all the network connectivity is in control of the tenant. And this makes it quite easy.
Yeah.
So if you, there's another difference for TKGs, we are using the NSXT load balancer. Within TKGm, you are more flexible from a load balancer solution, and you can use, for example, the NSX Advanced Load Balancer, formerly known as RV Load Balancer, to load balance your Kubernetes workloads. So what does it mean from a network perspective, from a network architecture perspective? So within your tenant, you would have an additional load balancer network where all your virtual services are living in. And these services and the load balancers are connected in some magic way so that your Kubernetes workloads are connected to the load balancer and your load balancer virtual IPs are connected to the load balancer network. Please forgive me that I don't explain it in detail how it works, because to explain you how the network is plumbed together would be a 1 to 2 hour session on its own.
Yeah. It's that multi-tenanted pixie dust again.
Yeah.
Okay, so so the advantages here then obviously are that this is all kind of native VCD functionality that you're consuming. You've then got the advanced load balancer from NSX, which from a pricing standpoint, I believe is akin to the load balancer that you had before, unless you start exceeding some serious bandwidth on there. So the service groups are I think priced on a core basis, but that is void for VCPP cloud providers to a certain limit. Correct me if I'm wrong here, guys.
Yeah.
And the advantage here is that you've got additional upsell because you've got a very, very capable container orientated load balancer as well as workload load balancer, which can start doing things like container ingress firewalling.
Yes, that's right. So with the base load balancer we have in TKGs and in TKGm as well is the layer 4 load balancing. So all the cool toys for the big boys and girls are in the RV load balancer. So if you want to have a real ingress egress load balancer, if you want to have a web application firewall, so all the cool toys that really make it nice and convenient to work with Kubernetes are in the NSX Advanced RV load balancer.
Yeah, and
okay.
let's touch briefly on the two editions that we have here with RV or NSX Advanced Load Balancer, right? So with NSXT base that all our providers are entitled to, you get the RV or NSX Advanced Load Balancer basic functionality, which is, as Stefan mentioned, up to layer 4 load balancing, including 4 Kubernetes and container environments, right? And if you want to use more of the advanced features of the RV, which is the enterprise edition, so that's global load balancing, layer 7 load balancing, web application firewall, things like that. That's the NSX Advanced Load Balancer or RV Enterprise Edition, which is in product usage guide, right? So this is sort of those two editions live and how they are consumed.
Yes, that's interesting. So you've actually got a bit more than you had before NSXV, because NSXV didn't cater for container layer 4 load balancing. And what we're saying now is actually Avi in this base package will do layer 4 for VMs and for containers, any endpoint really, to load balance those connections.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
What's cool about Avi is that you have some network bandwidth like licensing. So you can start with 25 megabits up to an increment of 4 gigabits per second. And it's really charged on the network bandwidth your customers are using.
Yeah. So the advice to the service provider is have a look in the product user guide before you kind of go for it to understand what your costs could be. Okay, and in this scenario, then we've got VCD in play here, right? So TKGm and VCD are the two kind of recommended components if you're looking at doing Kubernetes. We've also got container service extension in here, Stefan, like last time, providing the UI visibility. And what's the main difference there with CSE? We kind of explained it last time, but we didn't really get to nuts and bolts about the different layers in CSE that are being utilized.
So let's explain a little bit more in detail the components necessary for TKGm. And at the very end of the slides, I will show you the differences or what will happen if you add TKGs as well. By the way, what's a valid option as well? So you could have in your cloud director running legacy workloads, TKGm workloads, and TKGs workloads side by side. So that's not an issue. It's the same as with TKGs, the base environment. So it starts with a vSphere environment, NSXT. The differences within TKGm that we highly recommend to use the RV Advanced Load Balancer. Then we would have Cloud Director on top of these components, as you know already, with other environments. And now for TKGm, you would use the CSE server. CSE server, Container Service Extension server, is a small server running some Python scripts and taking care of TKGm, of provisioning, of day 2 operations, and of the whole TKGm management. And what happens if we have TKGs together with TKGm configured? So TKGs would be configured outside of Cloud Director, would live in a vCenter context. And TKGs would connect to Cloud Director directly to the CSE UI. So the Container Service Extension, I think when it was introduced, Jörg, do you remember when it was introduced? Was introduced with Cloud Director 10.3, but not sure about the CSE version when we split the server and the UI component. Do you know?
Yeah, that I think even happened in 9.7, so quite some time ago. When we had the additional plugin for the VCD UI.
Yeah, so we split this, the original Container Service Extension is now split into a server component and a UI component. So for TKGm, you would need the UI component and the server component, but for TKGs, the UI component and the underlying vSphere environment would be sufficient.
And I guess in this scenario, if I had, if that TKGs instance was in a different cluster, a different, so like a private cloud reaching into it, would that still work even though the NSX instance and other components may be in a different environment?
That's a really good question. So what you would have to take care of, no, that wouldn't work.
Would it? It
wouldn't work because Cloud Director, as we discussed, Cloud Director will bring in the microsegmentation for the Kubernetes workloads. And if the NSXT environment is not connected to Cloud Director wouldn't be able and capable of configuring the microsegmentation on the Tanzu part.
Yeah, so Cloud Director actually assumes that the TKGs is going to be in a shared environment because of that, right? Yeah. And that makes sense. I mean, that's kind of what we configured it to do. So that makes absolute sense. Okay, so that's an important principle for everyone to remember here then, that with TKGm, you need the CSE UI plugin and the CSE server plugin, which actually I think is one plugin, isn't that right? It's just you download the CSE plugin and that's it.
Yes, you even have don't have to take care of the UI plugin. Normally, the UI plugin is included in the Cloud Director release already. Just if you have to update it, you will get in touch with it. Normally, you shouldn't even get in touch with it.
Okay, and just remind me, where do we get the CSE plugin from?
So CSE for the server components, you download them directly from GitHub. And
right.
for the UI components, they are part of the VCD 10.3 or newer installation. So you just have to, as usual in VCD as a provider, you have to publish them to the individual tenants in the plugin configuration.
That's right. And just remind me, wasn't there quite a significant overhaul in CSE recently that meant that it was pretty much had to be a new CSE deployment and an upgrade? It wasn't kind of a slick upgrade like it normally is. I think there was some manual tasks you had to do for, it might be 3.1.1, I'm going to say. Am I in correct versioning land for that?
Yes, so there was some significant changes from CSE. I think it was 2 something to upgrade to 3.1.1, and it could be necessary that you have to clean up the TKGm integration, and then you can do an upgrade.
That's right. That was it. Yeah.
But you need to clean it up. And maybe comment on the new integration, because we supported in 2. I do not remember the correct version, but in the latest 2. Version, we supported TKGm as well. In 3.1.1, we integrated the full integration. So integration into RV, integration into NSX, integration into the storage. And with the latest version, you have all the integrations, or almost all the integrations you are used to have from TKGs.
Right. Okay, so as a provider, then, if you've not looked at TKG today, we haven't deployed it, the advice would be TKGm, CSE 3.1. Whatever the latest version is, 1.1. Yeah, that's right, 3.1.1. UI and server component, and as you all said, you grab the server component from GitHub. The UI is already in VCD, and you have to be on 10.2.1 for 3.11 of CSE came out with 10.2.1, didn't it? It actually shipped with it.
10.3.1, you mean? So the latest version of
VCD. Yeah,
latest version of VCD.
Sorry, getting so many versions like rushing around my head right now. Okay, so that's cool. All right, so that's good. So, I think from a level setting standpoint, then you've got a Kubernetes cluster service that you can deliver. What about the operational aspects of that service, though? We know that CSE goes through upgrades, and those upgrades have been in the past pretty seamless until we did that major overhaul, like Stefan just explained. So that's not a problem. What about monitoring the solution and understanding how you then meter for that solution?
So there are basically two aspects to monitoring, right? The first one is, how do I monitor the environment as a VMware cloud provider, right? So making sure that everything is up and running, and how do I, charge and meter the solution. And this is where, the VROPS tenant apps, excuse me. And this is where the VROPS tenant app comes in, right? So this can, monitor and meter the Kubernetes clusters that are deployed by my tenants and apply a price tag to that, right?
Okay.
Sorry. But then the other question is, as part of my offering, what capabilities do I actually give my customers in terms of monitoring, right? And there are, several options. One could be offering open source components like Prometheus. The other would be Tanzu observability. And the most common one for existing providers is actually vRealize operations that can monitor, not just the Kubernetes cluster, and that can be an additional chargeable service towards customers, but it can also monitor the workloads that are living in those Kubernetes clusters. So it's really a nice monitoring platform to monetize towards your customers once they're consuming Kubernetes on VCD.
Right.
I have a short video on that if you want to walk through that.
Yeah, let's go for it. I mean, one of the other things, just before we dive into that, Garrett, is obviously with VCD, unlike TKGs, we now have, which is pretty much a standalone single tenant offering. With the TKGm strategy with VCD, we have, like you said, vRealize Operations. We've got the management pack. We have also App Launchpad, which, if you're thinking about developing applications for your tenants or allowing your tenants to develop applications for their internal consumers or external consumers, then ALP would be a way of taking what you've developed in the Kubernetes test environments that you might have and publishing that to a catalog for either your internal consumers or a catalog item for your tenants.
Yeah, that's right. And that's actually part of the demo video as well, right? So at some point, we want to make sure that it's actually easy for your customers to deploy workloads into those clusters. And that's exactly what App Launchpad does, either with the Bitnami packages that we provide free of charge through VMware Marketplace, but it could also be, applications that the provider developed or maybe even the customer developed and packaged themselves and want to make consumable through the App Launchpad. So there's full flexibility from VMware Marketplace as well as self-developed solutions there.
Okay. Do you want to run down the video?
Yeah, let's quickly run through that. There we go. So this is really true for TKGm and TKGs, right? So this is irrespective of the underlying TKG version. But in VCD, right? So once we have deployed those Kubernetes clusters, it gives us the option to download the so-called kubeconfig file for each of those respective clusters. And that's really the file that I need to connect to the Kubernetes cluster as well as do monitoring and management on it. So in there we have, the IP address, the URL, as well as all the credentials that I need to log into the Kubernetes clusters. And that's what's required for vRealize Operations Manager as well. So what I need for that is the VROPS Advanced Edition and the Kubernetes Management Pack. And once the provider, has integrated that, I can add a new account in VROPS and just really copy and paste the information from that kubeconfig file into the VROPS interface. So the master server URL, as well as, the credentials for logging in. And that's really all it takes, right? So as a customer, I can simply copy and paste that, or I can, offer that as a managed service if I'm the provider of that platform. And from there, VROPS will be able to log into the VCD provisioned TKG cluster and monitor all the components, right? So in VROPS, as we see here, we have an additional dashboard for Kubernetes. And that gives me an overview of the Kubernetes cluster that I connected with VROPS. And then I can see, the master nodes, the worker nodes, as well as namespaces, ports, services, all the Kubernetes constructs that live on that cluster, right? So really powerful because I can also drill down on these different objects. So moving from, what node do I have, what services are running on that node, and so on, and really have the full visibility through the entire stack there.
So Garrett, just to rewind a sec, so that's vRealize Operations Advanced Edition?
Yeah, that's the VROPS Advanced Edition in combination with the VROPS Management Pack that I can download from VMware Marketplace as well.
And is the management pack an additional cost, or is that free to consume?
No, that's free of charge. It just requires the Advanced Edition, right? And not for the entire platform, really just for the Kubernetes portion that I want to monitor there.
I was going to say, you only pay with usage meter for the VMs that are under management for that VROPS instance, would that be right? So in this case, it'd be the Kubernetes cluster that is running, the hardware that's being used by that Kubernetes cluster.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, and your question to you, so really, with what we've seen in past kind of Feature Fridays and we've done with the Tenant app, this is a scenario then where we could actually just create a scheduled report and publish it to the Tenant app for the customer, the tenant, to actually consume themselves?
Yeah, so since these objects are now visible to vRealize Operations, all the mechanisms in vRealize Operations that we touched in previous episodes are actually available. So as a service provider, you can have either out-of-the-box reports that come with the management pack or create some custom reports and publish them into the Tenant app so that they are directly accessible in the VCD tenant UI. But you also can have, for example, if you work closely together with your tenant users, you can create some alerts as a service and use the Tenant app alerting functionality with these alert definitions that come with the management pack and set them up so that your tenant users get notified automatically once an alert pops up in vRealize operations. And of course, you can use the dashboard sharing functionality. So I think we also covered that in one of the monitoring as a service related episodes. And since these dashboards that Garrett showed in the video are, well, normal vRealize operations dashboards, you absolutely can use the dashboard sharing functionality to give this overview of Kubernetes monitoring and resource consumption to your tenants without any big additional effort. The only effort is really to configure the cluster once they are set up into vRealize operations, and then you can give your tenants access to that single dashboard link, for example.
So yeah, that would be a scenario where you'd have to understand what clusters if you'd allow the tenant admin to create their own clusters, then you would also need to kind of create the corresponding cluster reports and publish those. So
that's
into Tenant.
That would be part of the managed service. Within the Cloud Director tenant, the provider portal with the CSE UI part, you can see all the clusters from all your tenants. So it's not that you somehow have to, I don't know, create some automation around that, but as a provider, you really can offer that as the like an add-on service for your customers whenever they create some Kubernetes clusters that you can have access as a provider to the kubectl config file, and then you can add this monitoring capabilities and reporting and alerts based on that.
Okay. And I know we're going to have another session on some of the monitoring aspects in a little more detail when we get down to the actual Kubernetes layer. But just to kind of round it off, there is also metering that we need to take into account. And obviously, Tenant app is our kind of chargeback, showback functionality. What's available today with Tenant app that a provider can use out of the box to manage their TKGm instances?
So with the latest version of Tenant app, which is now following the version number system of vRealize operations, we have Tenant app 8.6, which got released a few weeks back in October. We do have basic metering and chargeback capabilities for these Tanzu Kubernetes clusters. So as soon as VROps has access to the VCD and Tanzu environment, and you have connected with, well, the CSE components, VROps is aware of the workloads that run CSE clusters or CSE managed Kubernetes clusters, and then you can have additional pricing, additional aspects in the pricing policy where you can add some price tags to these Kubernetes clusters.
Cool. So that's really full circle then. You've got the ability to meter it in pretty much the granularity you would need at a infrastructure level with vRealize operations, looking at the nodes, the clusters, the resources being consumed. And then you've also got the ability to kind of define rates and prices around the individual components of that infrastructure.
Yeah, and add that to the pricing policy for that or PDC.
Okay, cool. So if I am looking at this now, I think I'm pretty much good in terms of I now can provision it. I know how it's going to run with my existing, perhaps TKGs. I know how I can monitor it, and I know how I can meter it, and I know I can offer it to my tenants. And Garrett, I think next time we're going to go into some of the more in-depth Tanzu metering components.
Yeah, we can go into more of the we can deep dive more on the monitoring capabilities of other solutions in Tanzu, but we can also cover additional value add services like how do you do backup, right? Or what kind of alternative networking options are available? Things like what can RV do? What can Tanzu Service Mesh do in the future? So really everything that surrounds my Kubernetes as a service offering and makes it more complete from a customer perspective, right? Because it's more than running just the Kubernetes offering. You need all the adjacent services to actually make this fly holistically. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. And that reminds me actually, and Jorgen, you've been having some holidays, so you might not be that aware of up to speed yet, but Object Storage Extension, the latest version that came out, has a container integrated backup and restore mechanism. Is anyone familiar with how that works?
I think we did cover that in some of the Feature Fridays about Object Storage Extension 2.1. So with that, it's pretty generic. So Object Storage Extension obviously allows the service provider to offer some generic S3 compatible object storage as a service. And what we added in the latest OSE version is the integration with the open source Velero backup solution for container clusters. So it works in a pretty comparable way from an architectural perspective, like the vRealize operations integration. So you just give it a kubectl config file, and then object storage extension will configure the Velero agent in the Kubernetes cluster, and then you can automatically create some backup schedules to back up the workloads of that Kubernetes cluster and the configuration of the cluster onto the storage bucket that's presented by object storage extension. And that works for any kind of Kubernetes cluster. So Kubernetes clusters that are managed by CSE within VCD. So you get as a provider and a tenant, you get a pretty like out-of-the-box consistent user experience, because you just have a drop-down where you can like select your clusters that are managed by VCD and CSE technically, but you also can provide a generic Kubernetes config file to back up any cluster that run anywhere, be that managed within VCD or anywhere else, or on-prem or whatever, as long as network connection to the S3 storage service is available.
And that's something you can offer as self-service via the OSE extension into VCD, so the tenant admin can see then that functionality there, that Kubernetes cluster backup. Okay, and if I haven't got any S3 kind of hardware in my data center, there's always the Cloudian software appliance that you could trial out, but there's also Ceph, right? Support for Ceph.
Yeah, with object storage extension, we have some extensibility framework that allows you to use any to add any S3 compatible storage as a backend with some adapter programming needed. And for Ceph, we have this adapter as a reference architecture or a reference implementation of that extensibility framework. So you can add Ceph-based storage as a backend and then offer that storage in a multi-tenant fashion through object storage extension. For any details, and even for, if I remember correctly, we did a demo of that Kubernetes cluster backup and restore capabilities. Yeah, make sure to watch the OSE 2.1 episode.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and just to add on why that story is so powerful, right? So before that OSE 2.something feature with Velero came in, providers really only had the choice to build something on their own with the open source Velero project. Or alternatively, they would have used Tanzu Mission Control, which has backup and data protection features based on Velero as well, but it's a SaaS service, right? So if I'm a provider that wants to offer a sovereign cloud only focusing or building on services in my data center, using the object storage extension with Velero in as a tool for backup is super strong, right? Because I don't need to rely on anything that's SaaS or public cloud based, neither for the functionality nor for storing this. So really strong advantage for those providers that focus on data sovereignty and data locality.
Yeah, you raise a good point. And actually, there's one more question I'm going to ask in terms of context of that as well. So when we look at the full solution that we're talking about with VCD, OSE, CSE, ALP, how many more acronyms can we throw at this? That ALP component, App Launchpad component, that obviously uses marketplace, VMware Cloud Marketplace applications, Bitnami applications that you can pull down. And I believe in the latest version of ALP, that is now an environment where you can sync once and then schedule another sync at another time. You don't necessarily need to keep them in sync like you used to. So you can actually run that in those isolated environments.
You can run it in isolated environments, and for the Kubernetes workloads, which are technically Helm charts describing the workloads when they are being deployed, you are not limited to using content that is published on the VMware marketplace. You can also add any generic Harbor or any other registry, Helm repository registry that runs in-house, that is even managed for a particular tenant, for example, or for you as a provider. So you have, again, the full flexibility here in terms of where the content comes from that you want to publish through App Launchpad.
Yeah, you raise a good point. So App Launchpad initially was all about delivering vApps and applications based on vApps. Then, we packaged up Bitnami marketplace with it. that now it's Helm charts, VMs, VApps, whatever you want, and like you say, point it at your local isolated repos if you want, and pull the Helm charts from there.
Yeah, in general, that's a discussion that comes up a lot in the broader topic, in the broader sense, because Tanzu has some SaaS components to it, right? But
yeah,
for those providers that don't want to use that at all, we have plenty of ways of working around that. Like you mentioned, even if you're using, whether you're using the free Bitnami catalog or the commercial Tanzu application catalog, those packages can live in a local private registry in the partner's data center and then get deployed from there. And if we don't want to monitor them with, Tanzu observability as a SaaS solution, we use VROPS and the True Visibility Suite again as an on-prem solution. So there are plenty of ways to make this a totally sovereign offering for a provider.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've described now is, really using VCPP, the rental model that we have through points for our cloud providers, with what we've got today with TKGm, with VCD, vRealize operations standard, with and that's basically, I think, all that you're going to pay for vRealize operations advanced. On top of your 7-point flex, and then obviously if you want advanced load balancer layer 7 features and web application firewalls, and that's an additional item. But fundamentally, it's all on-premise rental model. Versus once you go into the SaaS world, you're in you're in a MSP contract territory, and then you also have the challenge of that security, I suppose, if you're starting to integrate SaaS solutions into your platform. That's a conversation for next time, because I do want to dive into Tanzu Mission Control, because I hear lots of good things about it, and I want to understand more about it. So perhaps that could be the next session we focus on.
2 minutes.
I wouldn't mind seeing the True Visibility Suite, because that's all kind of changed recently as well, gone from TVS to management packs, and I'm not quite sure if there's any actual changes there, or if that's just pricing and packaging.
Yeah, there's not too much that changed. So let's briefly walk through that. So first of all, there is App Launchpad, which we have shown in other episodes, which allows then the customer to deploy those predefined packages from Bitnami, from VMware Marketplace, or from the private repository of the provider or even of the tenant, right? So we select the Helm chart, which is basically a container packaging format. We select the cluster where we want this deployed, and then we launch the application, right? Now the question of how do I monitor these applications? And the True Visibility Suite of VROPS comes with the capability to monitor many open source database solutions, even Hadoop and so on. And that's agentless. So back in VROPS, we just need to install these management packs, and then we can add all those new accounts just by adding the instance IP and port and the respective credentials. No agents or anything required in the container deployment. And that's really the strength of True Visibility Suite above the standard VROPS capabilities. That you don't need any agents, and it can really deep dive into what's happening in the application and show relationships and really advanced metrics, as we'll see for MongoDB in a second here. And yeah, this is now part of VCPP since we acquired that, and it's really an add-on that partners can offer based even on the application workloads that their customers are using. So in this example, we see what's the cache looking like in MongoDB, information about the users and client performance and everything that's really deep in the details of that MongoDB containerized instance that we just deployed.
So this looks like really managed service material, right? You've got to set up the individual TVS connection with the management pack to the specific database. You got these reports, which could be fairly complex and may need some report interpretation. And you may also want to create some custom dashboards from these reports. And I assume that's possible, right? It's just standard VROPS. We can create a custom dashboard showing all of the metrics we want from the different applications associated with, from the different layers, associated with the application if we wanted to.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a regular dashboard in VROPS that you could share with the dashboard sharing functionality as it is. But of course, the real power comes in if you understand the application and then connect the different components of the application, the different layers, and have like load balancer statistics on top of for example, some e-commerce application that uses some web application servers and then connecting to the MongoDB database, and then be able to create alerts based on symptoms in all these different components, as well as, of course, showing dashboards with metrics of all these different components.
Yeah, and is there any way, if I wanted to, as a maybe I'm a sovereign cloud infrastructure provider, I want to give my tenants full access to deliver their own Kubernetes infrastructure, which they can today with VCD and CSE. Let's say I'm not worried about the layer 7 stuff with advanced load balancing, so they can configure their layer 4 stuff themselves as well via VCD. What about if I wanted to create these or upsell these management packs, but I didn't want to do the configuration myself? Is there any way to automate the provisioning of those if we captured all of the the inputs? Is there any way to push that into vRealize operations and configure that per tenant that you know of, Jörg, or would it have to be a managed service?
So vRealize operations does provide APIs that allow the installation and I think even the configuration of management packs. So you could do that through APIs using the VROps REST APIs. Of course, you have to use the VROps documentation to figure out the proper structure of the API call, but it should be possible to automate these parts or keep the but they use it in a self-service fashion, run a script that makes these calls.
Yeah, and it also really depends on what your go-to-market motion with VROps is, right? I mean, if we want this to be a really easy to consume offering, we would probably have to somewhat pre-integrate that. But VROps could also be a separate offering used for monitoring, on-premises systems. So those tenants might have their dedicated VROps instance anyways, and adding a management pack through the UI is really just, downloading it, adding it, and away you go, right? So it's really not that hard. And if you have a customer that's familiar with VROps, uses that as a self-service anyways, this is really straightforward, right? So it depends on sort of what the model is and how familiar your customers are with those tools.
Yeah, but if you've got a shared vCenter environment and you're only intending on, putting one vRealize operations instance in your environment and sharing that across multiple tenants, then you wouldn't be able to give that tenant access to vRealize operations to deploy management packs, or would you? I don't think you can.
Well, you probably need to do some really fancy role-based access control. So I'm not sure if that's really a scalable model. I think technically it's possible, but probably not the easiest way forward. Yeah.
So giving them a VROps instance, or if they have a VROps instance themselves, then that's fine. No worries. Deploy management packs, point them at whatever you want to point them to, and that makes total sense. But in a shared environment, the interface really needs to become sort of tenant app and publishing the reports into tenant app. That's pretty much what we support in any case. Okay, that's great. And I really want to kind of just reiterate the value of application launchpads, because I don't know, Gerrit and Stefan, what do you hear when you're talking to service providers about application launchpad? Because to me, it's a really, really differentiated solution for us. You can deploy applications where you need to know nothing about the underlying infrastructure. It's completely curatable and has a lot of advantages over the old infrastructure catalog that we had in VCD, and we still have. What are your thoughts around this, and how important is ALP to providers that you're talking to?
I mean, from my point of view, first and foremost, this is a really easy and low-cost way to broaden your portfolio significantly, right? I mean, you're basically installing App Launchpad and connect it up to VMware Marketplace, and you have a huge catalog of self-service items presented to your customers, which work pretty much like those comparable hyperscale offerings like AWS Lightsail, for example, work as well, right? So this is really powerful. And from there, it's really a matter of expanding your managed services practice on top to also provide managed services for all those packages or a subset of those applications. So really low-hanging fruit, really easy to implement, and broadens your portfolio significantly. That's what I'm hearing, right?
Yeah, App Launchpad adds these benefits for really simplify the consumption for the end users. I mean, in VCD, VCD does an amazing job of providing generic infrastructure as a service. We know that for the org VDCs with the virtual machines, now with CSE and the different Tanzu integrations, even for Kubernetes clusters. But VCD, does a good job providing the infrastructure. But with App Launchpad, you also now can make the consumption of these infrastructure resources as easy as possible for your tenant users, because they can go into App Launchpad and then deploy VApps into their org VDCs, Helm charts into their Kubernetes cluster, again, without caring much about the underlying infrastructure and really focusing on the application and the workload part.
Yeah, it's driving much more consumption of the underlying infrastructure with, like Garrett said and Jorg, you said, like the Bitnami pre-tested, pre-security tested, pre-functionally tested applications, and broadening your portfolio, drive more consumption. But then also it kind of provides a nice kind of full circle piece to your DevReady cloud. So I'm offering you the cloud, I'm offering the infrastructure, I'm offering you the Kubernetes clusters, I'm offering you the DevOps tooling with Bitnami. You got your options to your private repos, whatever you want. And when you finished creating all your applications, hey, you can publish them back to App Launchpad for your internal customers, perhaps to consume from there. So it really does go kind of all the way around, which is, you know, a nice close to the DevReady Cloud Loop, I think, for us. Okay, guys. Listen, I think that's it for today. And thank you so much again, Stefan. Thanks for walking us through the slides, and thank you guys for giving all your your feedback and thoughts around TKGm and the surrounding portfolio of ECD. Next session, I think we'll be diving more into Tanzu mission control, and Garrett, like you said, just going into more of the detail there and seeing what we can find out, and how that SaaS application could potentially be of value for providers delivering Kubernetes to their customers. Chaps, thank you very much this time. Speak to you next.
See you next time.
Thanks. See you soon. Bye.